Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here in the Pentagon, where we are in the offices of the U.S. Defense Digital Service to talk to Jonathan Mostowski, who is an acquisition strategist here, but also a bureaucracy hacker, which is an awesome title for somebody to have. Somebody who was formerly in the bureaucracy, as you were, whose job now is to improve the entire process through which the United States government gets IT, uses IT. So talk to us first about what the U.S. Digital Service is, because you're originally with the U.S. Digital Service before you migrated here over to the Pentagon. Talk to us about the whole mission of the organization, because I think most of the time people have absolutely no idea what you guys do aside from wear hoodies in the Pentagon.
Sure, absolutely. So the U.S. Digital Service was founded in response to the healthcare.gov website failure to launch properly. And so ultimately, the president at the time and the CTO went out and reached out to tech experts in Silicon Valley, brought them out to fix that challenge. And then what they realized is there might be other IT challenges elsewhere in the federal government. Go figure. So they did, and they started with a small group, and over time started realizing this is actually a major problem, and they expanded. By the time I joined U.S. Digital Service, I was about the 40th person, and I think the second government person. Most of the individuals on the team came from tech centers from across the country. So what U.S. Digital Services mission, and I'm actually still a USDS employee, I'm detailed here at the Pentagon, but U.S. Digital Services mission is to fix IT in the federal government, fix the way we go about buying it, the way we go about delivering it, changing the focus so it's on users, so user-centered design. We do a little bit of firefighting, so we will go in and we will address where crises are happening in IT issues at various agencies across the federal government. And then we do a lot for changing culture, where we work with policymakers and procedures to try to make things more efficient. Specifically, I work on the procurement team. We call ourselves the Procurementati. And our goal is to do the same thing, but focusing on the acquisition side. Because you can bring in great engineers and product owners and designers, and they can fix things that are existing in the current system. But if you want to have sustained long-term change in culture and success in the federal government with IT, then you have to change the way we procure things, so we can get great companies from across the country to come in, bring their expertise, and keep the government's tech moving forward.
You're in a unique position because unlike so many people who came in and folks could point to them and say, well, they really don't know how government procurement or acquisition works. You were actually a contracting officer in 1102, so you know about the classical U.S. government procurement and acquisition system. Talk to us a little bit, though, about driving that culture change. You said that when you started showing up here, it was like, hey, I can wear T-shirts and hoodies, and it doesn't matter. I don't have to wear my suit anymore all the time. And it's really, really cool when you walk into this space. It is a completely different chi that you're greeted with. That's why I took off my tie. Everybody who knows I'm wearing a tie generally wherever I am, so I thought I'd go casual today. But talk to us a little bit about how you're driving culture change. Especially in the Pentagon, right, where there is a lot more hierarchy. And there are folks who just do business the way they do business because largely they want to be able to say, I didn't take any risk. I just followed the book. If things went wrong, that's not my fault. I followed the book. So talk to us about the ways you're working. As you said, your title is bureaucracy hacker. There's part of it is breaking it, but part of it is getting folks out of bad habits that lead to that. So talk to us about how you guys are working as an integrated team to fight this very important battle.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, wearing the hoodies and the T-shirts, that's cool. It's a kind of a perk of the job. I mean, it's disarming, I guess, in some degree. But
in the Pentagon, yes, it's very disarming, Jonathan.
I don't know, maybe alarming or disarming. It depends. But no, in reality, the way we change culture, bureaucracy hacking is about changing culture, as you said. And so the way we go about doing that is we make small changes, right? So we've done things at the Pentagon like hack the Pentagon. I mean, if you show up at the Pentagon and say, we want to hack the Pentagon for the first time, nobody's going to be comfortable with that idea. In fact, they weren't, right? But we didn't start by hacking the entire Pentagon. What we started with was a program that focused on hacking a user or external facing static web page, right? Something that everybody could say, okay, well, how much harm could actually go? And that actually demonstrated the theory and opened up doors for us to look at the vulnerabilities of much more important and larger systems. Same thing as with acquisition. If I come into the Department of Defense or any federal agency for that matter and say, let's take your biggest flagship acquisition for the agency and I'm going to turn it on its head, we're going to ditch waterfall, we're going to ditch EVM, no integrated master schedules, and we're just going to award a who knows what and see what we get acquisition, people are not going to be too comfortable with that. Now, I will say sometimes those systems are in desperation, and desperation is a great force of change. So there are times where that actually does happen and we have those opportunities, but that's because senior leadership already knows the ship is going down and they're looking for anything to save it at that point. But in the most case, given an ideal set of circumstances, I would rather take a system that is not unimportant, but not at the secretary or director or general level of systems, but is actually an important system that people are focused on, and offer them another approach. I've actually had situations where I went in and a particular agency was going to do a $500 million acquisition to fix a system. And I pointed out to them, $500 million, if you estimate around 200,000 in FTE, you're looking at like 400 FTEs to build this system. And they looked at me kind of concerned and said, no, I think we need more than that.
Wow.
So, right. I mean, if you just take a regular Agile team, you're looking 6 to 12 people at 200,000, 250,000. You're looking at $3 million for a whole year of a full development team. So my challenge to them was, give me 6 months. Let me get a team in here. Give me 6 months to deliver a minimum viable product. You can continue down your path. If you've even made a award by then, which you won't have, then we can compare who's delivering more progress. But once they start seeing that they're actually getting functional change and functional products in their hands of their users, you'd be amazed how much people are willing to consider and try new things.
One of the things that you mentioned, well, let me take you to the question of sort of the systems that exist within the building, right? Throughout time, I mean, I've covered this long enough where I remember commandants of the Marine Corps or service chiefs putting directives out, thou shalt not make any IT change at all. Stop buying your own systems because this is a mess. And so this is a mess that's been decades in the making, right? Sure. There are still some understructures in this building that are running on prehistoric language. They have to be Rosetta Stones almost for folks right. to really understand these languages. And you can command a pretty penny if you do that. But last night I was at a dinner. There was a whole bunch of CEOs there. And one of them was talking about, look, we had a great innovative company and we had like 175 different systems and we went to SAP. He wasn't trying to make an advertisement for SAP, but he was like, and now, within another couple of months, we are all on the same architecture. There's no data that's hiding out in places. And if the Pentagon only knew what the Pentagon knows, it would be very, very powerful to be able to harness that information, given how many people are doing creative or important work in here. So from a systems change standpoint, talk to us a little bit about architecturally about eating this elephant, because with each passing year, everybody's doing stuff, all well-intentioned, but at the end of the day, I mean, it may look nice and shiny up front, but it's kind of a steam-powered contraption in the back.
For sure, yeah. And I mean, it's not an understatement to say pretty much every system has sort of a legacy, dinosaur-aged set of code base behind it. I am, and I think most of us here would say we're not a rip and replace supporting organization. So anytime the department or any civilian agency has attempted to replace a system in its entirety, it's largely failed. And failed in the sense of took longer, cost way more, and didn't deliver all the functionality they intended. Ultimately, the acquisition lifecycle takes so long, the development and delivery under waterfall takes so long, that even if they delivered everything they said they were going to, it's outdated by the time it shows up. So a lot of what we recommend, and this is supported by multiple sections of the FAR, but specifically FAR 39.1 talks about the acquisition of IT, specifically modular contracting, and it strongly encourages the use of building in pieces. And that's, I mean, Agile has become a bit of a buzzword. I mean, I still support it and use it, but really what we're talking about is iteratively delivering solutions. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter which side of the solution you start on. Sometimes it makes more sense to deliver things on the front end because you can get buy-in. You can deliver actual better user experience, which then gets people interested in taking riskier changes, which are often on the back end. As far as back-end solutions, there's a lot to consider when you do that. And ultimately, you get into security issues, commercial versus private hosted solutions, and these are all things that you have to take on a case-by-case basis. But even when I look at major systems here or at other agencies, and they say, how can we replace this entire thing? I often tell them, let's take the piece of it that's most critical, let's improve that.
How do you? Part of Agile organizations like this, right, is you're part of the defense, you're part of the U.S. digital service. How do you feed stuff up? How does your counterpart, who is the Air Force digital service boss, we double booked a room apparently, perhaps, but talk to us about how this process works, where lessons go up, they go out, or you get a lesson from HHS or Treasury or someplace else that's a good lesson, or one of your lessons is going back out there to help somebody else.
Yeah, this was a major problem, especially in the early days of U.S. digital service, especially for procurement. So digital service, be it U.S. or any of the agency particular digital services, is really good about using social media and tweeting and LinkedIn and all that. But when it comes down to it, especially in procurement, it's very unique. You know, people that want to replicate it want to see the samples. They want to read the case studies. They actually need the things you use because contracting officers and lawyers and program managers can't just talk in theory. They have to actually have the tools, and it's not something that you can acquire like tech training at a variety of trade tech providers across the country, right? So they really want these solutions. And so we were going into agencies, we were doing awesome stuff, but nobody was knowing about it. And if we tweeted about it, that's great, but how do I replicate that success? And there was only a small group of us, so the idea of us going everywhere and fixing everything is just not a reality. So ultimately, what we decided on was building a website, which we called the TechFAR Hub. It exists in the acquisition gateway, and it also exists at its own domain, techfarhub.cio.gov. We attempted to get it built. It was taking a really long time. Out of desperation, I decided to learn how to code just enough to be dangerous and built the website. I will say if you go there now, it looks better than when I made it. We've actually gotten some designers and real engineers to make it better. But I was able to build a platform where we could start loading our case studies. We built some tools. I have a solicitation builder that I built with an engineer that actually will write your entire RFP, RFQ for you and put it out there. So that's kind of one way where we sort of spread the lessons learned and the capabilities. And there's user feedback and all kinds of information on that site.
And every time you click on it, it has that cool lightsaber sign. No, I'm just kidding.
Your mouse turns into a lightsaber.
That would be really, really cool, actually. And we're going to have a Star Trek, Star Wars question for you later in the program. This is a popular thing that we do. But you have a different set of challenges. Government has a different set of challenges, right? So everybody who says, well, the commercial world does this, and you've touched on this, you know, they do all this stuff, and look how fast they move. And there are some fundamental differences between government and civilian life. But then the Pentagon has then a whole series of other challenges that are overlaid on it. So talk to us about the balance, you know, as we get more interconnected, as the hacking becomes much more sophisticated by external actors. You know, I mean, it took months, if not years, to boost the Russians from critical computers at the State Department, for example, including in some DoD places where they were lodged in and folks, you know, were working around that. Talk to us a little bit about that balance point, whether it's for the cloud, where there's been a lot of interest to put stuff up on the cloud, but then concerns of vulnerability and security issues that exist on the cloud as well. How do you balance all of these things? What are the differences? What from the commercial world works? What from the commercial world doesn't work? And how are you rewriting the book in your own way to deal with some of these challenges of security but agility?
Sure. So I think when we talk about what they do in industry, I mean, it's just a good starting point for conversation. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean, as you correctly pointed out, that everything that works there is going to work here, but a lot of it does, to be totally frank. It's more of a point of let's start the conversation instead of how do we do what we do the way they do it. Let's start with how and why do they do it that way, and what can we change internally to do that. So security is a great example, right? So most federal agencies want FISMA compliant, FedRAMP. They base a lot of their standards on NIST standards. If you actually
and NIST is National Institutes of Standards and Technology, which is the cyber infrastructure governing body for the United States standards-wise. And you mentioned FAR. FAR stands for the Federal Acquisition Regulations.
Thank you. I've been in the federal government a long time, so acronyms just kind of come out.
Nobody can tell.
Right. So, but if you go to NIST, where the standards are published, that most agencies base their security ATO. Approved to operate, authorization to operate standards, they base them on the NIST standards. But if you actually go to the NIST standards, they say these are not intended to be a standard, but in fact they're intended to be a basis of just making decisions. So it's not set out there to be the way all federal systems should be. They just wanted to get people thinking along those lines. And so what we offer, or what we would suggest, is private sector faces many of the same challenges that government agencies do. They are also being hacked all the time, maybe for different reasons, but intruders are trying to get into their systems. And regardless of what the outcome of an intrusion is, they want to protect their information and their users' information just as much. In some cases, maybe more when you talk about banking and high-profile accounts. So the idea is what do they do? Well, they do things like the hacking program, which we brought into the department, where they have white hat hackers looking in. But they also do things where they do, cloud hosting, where it was often a belief in the federal government that the only way to keep data safe was to keep it in a physical center locked down. And we've obviously learned that's not true either. But instead, having your information hosted in different areas where you can turn things on and turn things off without losing access or without losing content offers a lot of value. There's also a lot of other reasons why security in a hosted environment can be more beneficial. That doesn't mean we should say, okay, then forget, any kind of government-owned or secured environment, because there is data that we have that, quite frankly, shouldn't be in the commercial market space. And there are ways to address that too, whether it's a private cloud environment of some sort. So I just think it's necessary to have the right people. I think one of the things digital service at any level has brought to the federal government is getting smart tech people into the conversations. Whereas before, you might have had bureaucratic, lifelong government folks making tech decisions when they're really good at making, organizational management decisions. Now we're getting tech folks at the table to help make these decisions and where those lines are.
I never thought that the National Institutes of Standards and Technology would have something to do in common with Captain Barbossa, who's the pirates guy. It's not sort of code; it's sort of more like guidelines. It sort of like struck me because my life is governed by movie lines in my head. What about deciding on what the thing should be? Right, private industry has a tendency of sort of defining, this is what we need this system to do. This is what we need out of an IT network, right? Yep. And then they execute that. Whereas oftentimes in the Pentagon, in the process of defining what the thing should be, gets muddled, and then everybody throws their 2 cents in. And at the end of the day, it becomes an unworkable thing that has nothing in common with anything, and then ends up not working very, very well. What are some of the ways that you guys help sort of shape, what's the schooling that has to happen for folks to think sort of clear, this is what we need, let's execute what we need in an open way that then we can adapt and improve over time, as opposed to creating something that's just unworkable it's just not been well thought out from the beginning?
Yeah, this is the fundamental principle that the procurement team works on, because the reality is the government, the way they build requirements is they go out and they think they get one bite at the apple. So I kind of call this the cycle of destruction. So procurements take too long, so vendors feel like they have to bid on it because everything's been put in there. People put everything in there because they don't want to go through it again. It gets protested, so the next time it goes out, they put more information in. Vendors protest because they waited so long for it and because it's their one bite. And what we really need to do is start breaking that apart. The process of trying to determine everything that's going to be in a final tech solution delivered 5 or 10 years out is simply just has to be accepted as unrealistic, unreasonable, and unable to be accomplished. So what we actually have to do is figure out, what can we deliver now? What's the first thing that we can deliver of most value to our users? And we refer to that as the minimum viable product, or the MVP. When we talk about this, suddenly this changes the whole diagram, right? So we talk about statements of objectives as opposed to statements of work. I remember when I was doing major systems at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, we would have system requirement documents that were 700 pages long, okay? Imagine a vendor trying to price that. Of course it's going to be 30, 40, $50 million, because you put them on the hook to deliver 700 pages of tech specs, and that's just quite frankly complicated. And of course the contract's going to balloon over time, because 700 pages of tech is going to change as it's being delivered, and we know that. Accepting that up front and saying what I actually need, and this is how industry does it in many cases, is accepting the tech principle. What is the objective I'm trying to solve for? I don't need to necessarily define the tech solution. I may have to describe interfaces, especially in the government, where there's going to be tons of existing infrastructure and interfaces that have to work with this new solution. I may have to tell industry, hey, you're going to have to interface with this accounting system. You're going to have to interface with this, choose your product. Which is going to be custom GOTS, government off-the-shelf software. So you have to give them that information, but you let them bring their approaches and their solutions. But most importantly, I spent a lot of time trying to define what the best contract method for doing this would be, and I could certainly talk about that. But I think I've gotten to a place where I don't think it matters. The purpose, what matters is you build a contract that is not in the way of delivering functional products to users, but does protect the government and the contractor to make sure that everybody's doing what they need to do. So we kind of think of it as a form of buying a factory. or we call it a repeatable process for the delivery of functional product. That's what you're buying. This isn't something we made up. FAR 37.6 is performance-based service acquisitions. It's actually required by statute to try and be used as much as possible. Talks about procuring a service for the delivery of a product, and that's exactly what we're doing here.
And you were saying about 700 pages. I mean, the problem with 700 pages is those are verifiable things that the guy can be judged on, and so like any organization, he's trying to indemnify him or herself from that. Now, there are profound Star Wars themes across your offices, some of which we can't point the camera in that way, but I think Star Wars is overrepresented. There's the United Federation of Planets flag. I just have to say, I'm of a generation where it was Star Trek, and then we were like, oh wow, Star Wars. But Captain Kirk was still pretty badass, and so we like him. But tell us, a little bit. There's the Rebel Alliance theme against the Empire here, and but that can be kind of tricky because the Empire is actually part of your team too in this particular case. So talk to us about how the analogy, sort of works without really labeling the chairman and the Joint Chiefs of Staff as part of the Empire, for example.
So this is probably the best interview question I've ever had. I love it. So, a couple things. One, of course, the Rebel Alliance to some degree is tongue-in-cheek, right? The idea of what we do here, besides bringing really talented people and getting sort of unusual access to decision makers, is we kind of embrace and I think inspire creative thinking. And so that's kind of where the tongue-in-cheek is. In some ways it is true. Now when we say, who's the good guys, who's the bad guys, that's not what we're doing. What we're actually doing is saying we're looking for people who want to be part of this change, and we find them everywhere and almost always at the top levels of leadership. Rarely do we come across a senior leader at any organization that doesn't want the same things we want, and they want us to be there to do it. It's working through that level of leadership whose job it is to make sure their boss doesn't look bad, so they go with the lowest risk solution. And to be totally frank, we bring risky solutions. We think of them as responsible risk-taking, and we provide mitigation plans to those risks. So it's not reckless, but there is risk. Great risk comes great reward, but without any risk, it's unlikely to have any change. And so what we're actually trying to inspire people with this sort of kind of joking Star Wars analogy is, do you want to be part of the future? Do you want to be part of this change? We're trying to inspire hope. Come join this mission, whether you're literally joining the mission, like signing up for a tour of duty with the digital service, or what's more common is individuals that are all over these agencies, and there's so many talented people in the federal government and on the contractor side that share the same passion for delivering excellent functional products to users, regardless of what that user base is, internal or external. They're all over there and they've never been given a voice, and what we do is we give them a voice. A lot of the great solutions we bring come from the groups that we go to help, and they're like, well, geez, I've wanted to do this forever, but I just never could get it done. And we look at it and that's a great idea. We're going to help you get that done.
And that's the point you made, is that even though there are a lot of military folks who are wearing uniforms out there, you were like, they're just as open-minded as the guys who are wearing T-shirts and hoodies. And I guess your point would be that the Empire really is the bureaucratic morass. It's not the individuals. It's the Death Star. I don't know where I'm going with this, but right, that's sort of what you're talking about. It's not the people, but it's what has been created.
I think you capture that perfectly. Actually, I might steal that one from you. That's exactly what it is. It's definitely not the people. The people, for the most part, by and large, are fantastic. It's the process that they are forced to work in, and we're trying to break that apart. And that's the bureaucracy hacking. That's finding the shortcuts. Sometimes the shortcut is, we have access to a senior leader. Can we get this one thing waived this one time? Sometimes, and then we prove it works. And then sometimes the bureaucracy hacking is, we take the time to write a policy that says, if you do it in this particular way. One quick example. The 8A program is a program that allows agencies to sole source under FAR 19.5 to sole source to companies with an 8A designation from the Small Business Administration. The program was suffering because a lot of agencies were afraid to use the program because they had this misconception that if they used it, they were stuck using an 8A vendor forever, and as their program scaled, 8As may not be able to support it. So the U.S. Digital Service procurement team got together with the SBA, the Small Business Administration 8A program manager, and we talked to her about this, and she was like, of course that's not the case. Like, there's circumstances that make sense when you're in the program, when you're not. So what we did is we actually drafted 3 different versions of statements of objectives that when used in the 8A program, agencies could choose at the end of these to continue through the 8A program or to then scale out and leave the program without having to go through the normal process. We actually got the 8A program manager to write a memorandum that agreed to that signed it, that agencies can hold that up with their statement of objective. This has been a great way to get access to 8A vendors. It's a great way when someone comes in here and says, I need a vendor to start working in the next month, we can get someone on board in just a couple weeks. But it also removes that sort of unrealistic risk. And this is the thing, a lot of the things that create bureaucracy in the federal government are because something went wrong one time and someone wrote a rule about it. And what we try to do is show that this isn't the actual case. And when you take these away, you're actually not in any more danger. You actually have more flexibility to deliver what you need to.
You raised something which I was debating to ask you, but I have to ask you once you raised it. The reason we've created the Death Star is, well-intentioned. Nobody ever starts out saying, I want to screw up the acquisition program, right? Nobody ever comes to work and says, I want a worse outcome at the end of the day. So lawmakers, in part, and good bureaucrats, as yourself, who you're now hacking yourself, and that's an important step, Jonathan.
True,
but how do you? I mean, do you have to educate like there has to be a different education process, right? To say we can take risk, we failed, we learned a lesson, we're moving on, as opposed to creating a whole series of regulations and rules that actually just end up working against you all the time.
Yeah, it's actually really laughable, and it goes back to our previous point about it's the process, not the people. I've worked with the Armed Service Committee staffers. I've worked with DPAP, OMB, OFP, Office of Management and Budget, the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. Sorry about that.
Well done.
Thank you. I'm learning. And in every one of those circumstances, they have been completely allies. They have helped us. They've helped us get language in the NDAA 2018, which is really helpful language. It's going to make a big difference once it's put in place. We've worked with the Office of Federal Procurement Policy to draft memos to help clarify. And what you'll find, I mean, if you want to use the Death Star analogy, is that all of these Death Stars, there's multiples, any bureaucratic organization in the federal government has that valve that you can destroy it with. And in these cases, the Federal Acquisition Regulation encourages in the very front of it, in FAR 1.102, that if it doesn't say you can't, you can, and that and contracting officers are encouraged to use reasonable best decisions to make that are in the best interest of the federal government. The DoD 5000, same thing. It says that the Milestone Decision Authority has the ability to change any of the rules in this document that are in the best interest of the department. All of these things, when the people were creating it, they knew that we were building a structure, but the structure is not going to fit every situation. They built those things in. But I'm often asked to talk about innovative contracting, and I really talk about innovation, and I think of that as like three things. Primarily, it's assuming what you're doing is wrong or at the very least could be done better. Educating yourself deeply, so not superficially, but actually getting a deep knowledge and understanding of the environment that you're working in, and then taking responsible risk-taking. But you can only do those with all three pieces. So you're only responsibly taking risk if you know where the actual boundaries are. But what you often see is people assume where those boundaries are, and they try to stay within a very narrow lane so as not to touch those third rails. Often after you educate yourself, you find out that those rails are either movable or non-existent or much further out than you anticipate.
And speaking about a third rail topic, Star Wars, why not Star Trek? There was a little derision, I have to say, when I made a comment about no Star Trek, and it was so walk us through that. Star Wars, Star Trek, why?
Wow.
It's an important question.
This is really what this was all about. I totally agree. I think the original digital service folks were Star Wars individuals, and that's where this really all came. And the Rebel Alliance kind of drew people in, and it sort of grew from there. Nothing against Star Trek. My wife is a big Star Trek fan, just not my thing. But generally, the Star Wars, it's action-packed. They're heroes coming in and saving the day. I don't know. It's a personal choice, I think.
But a worthy choice. Jonathan, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Best of luck to you guys. It's utterly fascinating, and look forward to really staying in touch to see how you guys are breaking the Death Star apart one step at a time.
All right. My pleasure. Thank you very much.